We went into the general election with a progressive smoking ban. We also went into it with national service. And in fact, when the national service policy came out, I was in such disbelief that I blogged for my constituents' clarity that I am always for freedom. And the problem with state land use planning is, of course, that it is the planning of land use by the state. It is socialism. I think we'll probably need to leave the ECHR. I think we will. But this is a really important moment for us all. Because the ECHR was set up because in Europe, in a civilized nation state, human rights collapsed into absolute totalitarianism. I should say it's very humbling to be here because there's at least two of my mentors in the room, so I'm really grateful to you all for coming. I think we meet at an extremely important time. But I would say this, that if the Conservative Party does not stand for freedom, then it stands for nothing. And we see the consequences of that in this election result. We went into the general election with a smoking ban, a progressive smoking ban, and we also went into it with national service. And in fact, when the national service policy came out, I was in such disbelief that I blogged for my constituents' clarity that I am always for freedom. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I think this is why so many Conservative voters in Wickham stayed at home. They didn't avalanche to Labour. Labour's vote came down. They didn't go to Reform, but what happened is Labour's vote declined, mine collapsed. About half of former Conservative voters stayed at home. If only a quarter had stayed at home, I might have won. So, you know, if we don't stand for freedom, we stand for nothing, people don't turn out. I do think we're meeting at a very, very important time for the world. Clearly, millions of people in the United States, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and elsewhere believe that the world is not working for them. So just touch on one illustrative example of policy, housing, which Jack covered very ably. When I first started talking to young people about freedom 14 years ago, you could just talk in the abstract about freedom. But now, until you've talked about housing, you haven't captured them. I mean, I think that Bartek's ambition for more children would be fairly easily fulfilled if young people could get themselves into houses.
Yeah.
But think about housing. Is housing characterised by spontaneous order through private property rights and freedom to contract? I ask that as a rhetorical question because, of course, it's first and foremost characterised by state land use planning. And the problem with state land use planning is, of course, that it is the planning of land use by the state. It is socialism. We amazingly live at a time when altogether too many people are incapable of recognising socialism when it stares them in the face. Housing is not working because of state land use planning and also, I'd argue, cheap credit, but that's for another day. So we've got to learn to recognise unfreedom where we find it, socialism, planning. Planning and socialism used to be synonyms. So I particularly want to commend Mark Pennington, who's here, his excellent book, Liberating the Land, on how to get rid of state land use planning. Only earlier today I was commending it to someone. So the second point I want to make is that we really need to take stock and ask ourselves what we believe and what we're trying to achieve. I watched a video a couple of days ago of Bush Jr. saying that there are some isms that occasionally arise in human history, and he identified isolationism, protectionism, and nationalism. Nativism, rather. These are extremely dangerous forces, and if you don't believe me, I commend to you Omnipotent Government, a book written in the 1940s. These are extremely dangerous forces, and we should fight against them. We should stand against them for good reason. But they are animated, of course, by real suffering in people's lives. So I tell you what I would like to achieve. I would like everyone to be safe and secure, including getting the right healthcare. I'd like them to be able to be whoever they want to be, who they are and who they want to be, safe and secure in their identity as well as physically safe. They should have available to them high-quality, voluntary community in which to enjoy relationship with others, high-quality work, and, of course, something to look forward to. But if you survey these things and say, well, if those are the five main elements of life, themes of life, what is the role for the coercive power of the state in these things? Well, much beyond safety and security, probably not very much. So I really want us to be clear that we're after a society which is safe and secure, happy, prosperous and free. I think there are about 5 areas that we should be thinking about: information, ideas, interests, institutions and strategy. And I'm clearly not going to go through all of those right now. But I want to talk about some dominant themes. War. This is not really a theoretical conversation now. This is a very practical problem, war in Europe and in the Middle East. And war, of course, were it to develop, would overrun any other conception we had of what mattered. Yeah. Technological revolution, not only AI and quantum computing, which in combination would make a really transformational difference, a huge problem for cryptography, undermining much that we now rely on, but also synthetic DNA, which I've just discovered and starting to read into. I think we've barely begun to understand what technological wave is about to crash over us. And yet, even with all that going on, and even with the culture wars, I would still say that the fiscal situation that we face is the problem which we are going to face more than any other. We can't afford the government that we've got. It doesn't work very well. And if you look forward, whether you look at the Office for Budget Responsibility Fiscal Sustainability Report or the Government Actuaries Audit of the National Insurance Fund, we've got about 20 years until the welfare state is hard into default. That's only going to be about 3 more parliaments, because I don't believe Labour would fix it. So it's a call to action then. First, have good hope, because we do actually know the answer to the difficulties that we face. It is to seize hold of and maintain your grip upon the principles of a free society, civil society, the rule of law, justice, property rights, freedom. So seize on to the principles of a free society, maintain good cheer, but always say to yourself, whatever problems we have, they were not caused by freedom. Right, so I'll take the first and the third questions together. It's a subject very close to my heart about accommodating reform. Nigel Farage and Richard Tice made absolutely the right decision not to stand candidates against incumbents in 2019. Why did they make that decision? Because somebody reached out to them and met them very privately and began the process of persuading them not to do it because the consequences would be adverse to their own cause. And the person who did that was, of course, me. And so, and I had a cordial word with Richard Tice in Portcullis House yesterday, the details of which I'm not going to share with you, but anyone could, like plenty of journalists might have seen this. So I do know them, and I quite like them in many ways. But what I would say is it's impossible to reach an accommodation with someone who wants to destroy you. Nigel Farage and Richard Tice explicitly set out to destroy the Conservative Party. You just can't accommodate that. You can't work with it. I mean, Karl Popper said something about if someone prefers shooting to you to talking to you, it's no point trying to talk to them. And I'm afraid Nigel and Richard appear to have alighted on the idea that they can't get what they want from the Conservative Party. They can't shift the Conservative Party to where they want it to be. So what they're going to do is keep fighting and growing until they can force PR on maybe a Lib Lab coalition. And then when they get PR, they think that will somehow be better. And it's a crazy idea. The problem with coalitions is you don't ever get, the public never get the government they vote for. They always get a government that's negotiated after the vote. So it's an extremely difficult structural problem, as Steve says. But my view is that rather than allowing nationalism and isolationism and protectionism to arise and then trying to cope with it, we should actually be leaders as politicians and as informed members of the public and intellectuals. We've got several in here. And we should try to shift the public debate. I've got some ideas for a structure I'm going to set up, which I've discussed with Reem. She liked it, so I'll do it. But I'll start setting that up probably next week to try and amplify these voices so that we can work together. So you can't accommodate them. On the wealth and wealth creation, inheritance tax certainly should be completely abolished. I made that proposal to my political masters during the election campaign. It didn't poll sufficiently well. We have got to decide what we believe is right and then sell it and use polling and focus groups to work out what the right messages are. Thank you. So that was the approach that we used when I was running the COVID recovery group. What do we think is right? How do we sell it? Rather than saying, what on earth do the public want? How can we give it to them? That's the doctrine, further to your point about wealth creation. This doctrine of trying to give the public what they want is what's got us into this mess. I want to be absolutely clear what I think is going on in the world. This is an existential crisis of a failed political economy of social democracy and interventionism. I'm going to say that twice because I don't want anyone to miss it. Yeah. This is an existential crisis of social democracy, interventionism. The post-war consensus of a big welfare state is breaking down. Since the end of Bretton Woods, it's been funded by expansionary money. First cheap credit and then QE. And that's why the world doesn't work for people, because as Keynes knew, although he misattributed it to Lenin, it's the best way to overturn the existing basis of society is to debauch the currency, because it engages hidden forces of disruption which not one man in a million can understand. Ask yourself, are we in the biggest bubble in history? You can obtain my book with Max Rangeley free on my website, and I will put some hard copies in the IEA. But wealth creation, absolutely, because the fundamental problem we have, and have had for a long time, is we've been living chronically beyond our means, and ultimately, as rulers always have, ultimately covering it by debasing the currency. And that system is currently ending. And the challenge for all of us who believe in a prosperous, free and secure society is to win the argument that the problem is not freedom. The problem is the state.
Steve, you wanted to kick us off?
Yeah, just because I think I can be really quick. So on the navel gazing, we've had a plea against navel gazing and then a plea for navel gazing. The truth is that this is an IEA event, not a Conservative Party event, as has been said. We've just, all of us who shift events, we've just got to decide what we believe is true. And I'm telling you that I think that the state is the problem, not freedom. And we've really got to get on and make a positive, practical programme which can give people who are not interested in ideology a world which works for them. That is the crucial point. Immigration, the right policies, it's got to be under control. We've got to deal with illegal immigration because it's an outrage, not least because people are dying doing it, and we've got to control numbers because there isn't democratic consent for it, and you can't have open borders and the welfare state. But I just want this point about a long time coming is where I'd like to land, because it's back to that ladder of aspiration. There are basically two categories of human action, and they get confused, and it's a category error. One is the private citizen's way, which is prices, profit and loss, strong profit motive and freedom of exchange and so forth, private property. And there is the government's way, which is rule following and bureaucracy. Another way of characterising it would be voice and exit. So voice would be the government's way and exit is the market way. And a big problem is happening at the moment is people are starting to use exit in politics when actually I'm afraid politics needs to work in a slightly different way because it's not a market economy. But we need to be really ruthless with ourselves, all of us, at focusing on voice versus exit, which, by the way, is Marx's Robust Political Economy. It's an excellent book. Or the private citizen versus the state. And until we can really ruthlessly cut through what the problems are and the causes of our difficulties, we're not going to get anywhere. And it is going to require serious thought.
Steve, do you want to kick us off? We've got quite a few there.
All right.
Housing, compassion of the left, and a little bit about what we can do to actually get them to get into government.
So, on housing, yes, the Labour Party does agree, and when they go for it and try and build houses, the Conservative Party in Parliament really must back them. I'm going to mention my Substack. Please do have a look at my Substack. There's an article on it which says how the Conservative Party must react to Labour. Labour's agenda is going to be incoherent ideologically. They're going to nationalise the railways, dramatically bureaucratise devolved government in England, then they're going to bring in the private sector to reduce waiting lists in the NHS, and go for it and enable private house building to happen. The way, it's the kiss of death, I'm afraid. There's no nicer way of putting it. Every time the Labour Party does something liberalising that moves towards freedom, the Conservative Party in Parliament must heap praise on them, vote for it, seize the initiative and get them to go further. And if they don't, it's the death of the Conservative Party, because young people will want the housing, and we are going to have more involvement of the private sector in healthcare. So that's about the Labour. On the right, why is it hard to sell? I hope when you leave, or even now, you will look up towards the back of the room and see why it is that I personally love speaking in this room. We have got to learn, all of us, to care about one another. I kind of compare Ayn Rand to Nigel Farage. Very important, very, very important flag bearers, but ultimately unhelpful to the cause. And Ayn Rand in particular, there's plenty of people on the right, as it were, who think Ayn Rand's a good idea. Selfishness is not a virtue. But this is where we sort of agree. I'm all for community, but a healthy community is voluntary. It's where we choose to care for one another. Choose freely to care for one another and lift them up. And, one of the miracles of society is that we're not all starving in the gutter, or that there are gutters. But, there is no question of getting rid of the welfare state. When you've talked about redistribution, it would just be nice to have a welfare state which we could afford, which worked quite well, and quite frankly, I think that friendly societies part funded out of taxpayers' money would go a long way, but that's another story.
And which didn't bankrupt young people that are actually contributing.
Yeah, well, as well. But also, with Thatcher and that point about recruiting the right people, people often have asked me, a couple of confessions, they've often asked me, how on earth did you get through? And that is a sad, if I say so myself, it is a sad reflection that people asked how a true believer in freedom managed to get through the selection process. The only way to get the Conservative Party selection process to select people with, and by the way, Jack is here, obviously, plainly has a robust grasp of the principles of a free society, so don't lose all hope. But it is going to fall to a Conservative leader and a chairman, and possibly some democratic reforms to elect a chairman, to make sure we get the candidates we want. But the second confession is this. I got a sneaky word after my parliamentary assessment board that I'd written probably the best essay on why I am a Conservative that they'd ever seen, they told me. Why do you think that was? It was because I had just read Hayek's The Constitution of Liberty, and at the back of that the essay, don't spoil it, it's my joke. The essay in the back of that book is called
Why I Am Not a Conservative.
Yeah, so having just read it, I just regurgitated it, and they thought it was fantastic, and I've never confessed before that that's where it came from.
Excellent, that's amazing. And Steve, last but not least.
Well, I'm delighted to say there's more agreement amongst us than I thought there was going to be, Bartek. This is great. It's been an absolutely fascinating evening with terrific questions, which have deserved far longer answers than we're able to give. On the families of the right, in a sense, sometimes I think that all legitimate political economy is within the Conservative Party, which is both a joy and a disaster. And that is both the desire to advance liberty and also the concern that we might go a little bit too far and we should slow down and be more conservative. But the thing that can unite us, to answer your question directly, is the policies around the human services. We basically need to do the big society, but better and more fully. And that was something that Danny Kruger and I agreed on, and he and I are regarded as different wings. But we are, in the end, all Conservatives for a reason. But the human service is the big society. So your question about can we in itself build houses for prosperity, you must be right by implication. The answer's got to be no. I once walked to an IEA event with a then Chancellor of the Exchequer. Doesn't matter which one. Well, it does matter which one, but I'm not going to tell you. And he was, with three of us were walking together, he said to the other one, he said, the thing is, the way the UK economy works is you build lots of houses and pour cheap credit into them, and up goes growth. And I thought, aha, I wasn't mad, I was right, that is what they've been doing. And that's the problem. Why are we so dependent on the cheap credit, though? I'm afraid I've already sort of covered that. We live beyond our means chronically, and you can only tax, borrow and debase. And I'm afraid far too few economists pay attention to monetary phenomena. But you must be right. So I'm afraid I think we're going to have to do a very hard thing in not too much time from now, and that is reform the way the monetary system works. And unfortunately,
how would you reform it?
Well,
how long have we got? Yeah, it hasn't been.
Give us a couple of points.
It's been such a long evening. Well, I would not trust monetary policy to the Bank of England, just like Richard Cobden, which is why, of course...
Would you get rid of the Bank of England?
I absolutely agree with Bagehot. If you read Bagehot's book, Lombard Street, which is the original handbook of central banking, you will be amazed to discover that Bagehot wasn't in favour of central banking. It's just that he said there was no manner of use proposing to abolish it. If you want to read the chapter, it's on the Cobden Centre website, and you'll find it easy enough. But no, there should be no central banks. It's the most... You've set me off.
I knew what I was doing.
There are basically three kinds of socialism. The least dangerous is the obvious kind that wants to nationalise everything. The centre ground socialism is the one that believes in free markets but not in infrastructure. And that is fairly easy to call that, and you can sort of tolerate it, but it is still socialism, that the state needs to build all the roads and railways. The most dangerous form of socialism, this is not me, by the way, I can't remember the author's name now, but it was a very interesting author. But the most dangerous form of socialism is the one that is radically right-wing superficially, but believes in central banking. Which is what is the fundamental point about central banking? It's the Monetary Policy Committee and the Financial Policy Committee and the Prudential Regulation. They're all committees of planners. It's incredible that otherwise free market people will sit around waiting to see what fundamental market price is about to be determined by the Monetary Policy Committee, a committee of planners, and yet they think they're free marketeers. It's the most dangerous form of socialism because it affects everything in the economy, and because most of you sitting here as free marketeers think it's not socialism. Oh, drives me crazy.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I'm quite finished. I want to say there's a really... You've set me off, I'm sorry, and I don't want to dominate it, but the lady there, you said so much that I agree with, but there was just one moment that I think is a lesson to all of us and really important to take in. Now, I think we'll probably need to leave the ECHR. I think we will. But this is a really important moment for us all, because the ECHR was set up because in Europe, in a civilized nation state, human rights collapsed into absolute totalitarianism. And it didn't just happen in Germany, it happened in Russia too, and the satellite states. And the ECHR, when you read the convention, is perfectly reasonable. The problem is the overreach. And now, of course, human rights didn't collapse in the United Kingdom, and we can have human rights here without the ECHR. But it's very interesting that you applauded that point, because actually it goes, I'm afraid, to my earlier point, that in a time of nativism and isolationism and protectionism, it's an extremely worrying phenomena that the institutions which were established to protect us against the last major historical event when those forces arose, those institutions are collapsing, and you're enthusiastic about it. And I just think we all ought to take stock on that and think what is going on and how do we defend all that we hold dear, because that is what it's going to come to. I want to finish on an optimistic point, as Jack did, by agreeing profoundly with Jack. The single most important thing that all of you can do, and everyone watching this programme can do, is to subscribe as a paid subscriber to my Substack. No, it's not. No, it's not. It is to join the political party of your choice. In the end, the reason we don't get the politics we want is because we don't turn up for that occasional evening once a year to just vote on the candidate selection and then hold the incumbents to account. And I think, please, join the political party of your choice.
Join the IA book club if you'd like to come to more events like this.